In order to provide care for a lonely elderly man, a young nurse goes above and beyond her duty, viewing him not only as a patient but as she devotes her life to making the last days of a person's life as enjoyable as possible. But after his death, a visit from his lawyer discloses a shocking fact about him that forever alters her life. Hi everyone, welcome back to Unveiled Narratives. Today I have another heartfelt story to share with you. It was another routine day at St. Vincent's Hospital. Anna, a nurse in her late 20s, moved briskly through the ward, checking patient charts and ensuring everyone received their medications on time. Among her assignments that day was a visit to room number 95, where an elderly man had been admitted weeks ago after his cancer treatments had failed. With no family to advocate for him, he had remained in the hospital for end-of-life care. It was Anna's first time checking on this particular patient. As part of her rotation, she had been newly assigned to his care. That morning when she entered room 95, she found the elderly man sitting up in bed, his frail body leaning against the pillows. His tired eyes were focused on the window looking out at the courtyard below. Anna greeted him with a soft good morning, but he didn't respond much, just a slight nod. As she checked his vitals, she noticed how quiet the room was. Unlike the other rooms she'd visited, there were no flowers, no family, no get-well cards, only a single old photograph of his late wife on the bedside table in the ward. Anna often saw the elderly man sitting quietly in his chair by the window, his gaze drifting between the courtyard outside and the hallway. From time to time his eyes would rest on the other patients who were surrounded by their families. Their laughter, their shared stories, and the comforting presence of loved ones seemed to fill the space with life and warmth. Anna noticed how his face would soften in those moments, as though he was happy for them, but when she checked on him in his room later, that small smile would be gone, replaced by a stillness that spoke of years of loneliness. His room felt especially empty. It wasn't just the absence of visitors, but the starkness of the space itself. Anna decided she couldn't let it stay that way. The next day, she brought in a small vase of daisies and placed them on his bedside table. The elderly man didn't say much, but his gaze lingered on the flowers for a long moment, and she thought she saw a faint glimmer of peace in his eyes. After that, she started finding other small ways to make his space feel less lonely. Some days it was a colorful card she placed on his tray table. Other days it was a book she would read to him in quiet moments. These small acts weren't required of her, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. Anna's shifts were long and she often worked double to save for her future, but even on the most exhausting days she made sure to stop by room 95. No matter how tired she was, she wouldn't let him feel forgotten. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Anna brought a warm cup of tea to his room. It wasn't in her job description, but she remembered how his face had lit up the first time she'd done it. The elderly man, once a shadow of himself, now seemed to find comfort in these small acts of kindness. His tired eyes brightened as he held the cup, a silent appreciation in his gaze, as if these fleeting moments of care were a reminder that he was still seen, still valued, even in his solitude. Despite her own exhaustion, Anna never let the weight of her work keep her from those quiet moments of care. She couldn't explain why she felt so drawn to him, but she knew it was more than just duty. It was a simple truth: no one should feel alone, especially not in their final days. Over time, the strangeness between them faded, replaced by a quiet familiarity. The elderly man's face would brighten whenever Anna walked into the room, and she in turn found herself looking forward to those moments. In caring for him, she discovered a sense of purpose that made the exhaustion of her long shifts feel lighter. The small acts of kindness she offered seemed to make a difference, and the elderly man's eyes would always soften when she walked in. It was a quiet connection, but it was real, a bond formed not by words but by simple actions and shared moments of silent understanding. But one afternoon, as Anna walked into the ward, something unexpected caught her attention. Standing outside room 95 was a man in a dark suit, his serious expression set as he looked toward the door. He wasn't like the usual visitors or staff Anna was used to seeing, and his presence immediately piqued her curiosity. Approaching him, the man leaned slightly toward Anna and said, "I'm here to see Mr. Donovan," in a low but distinct tone. "Can I help you?" Anna said. "I am Mr. Donovan," Anna's lawyer, but she had never heard his full name and had only ever known him as the lonesome old man in room 95. Anna became curious when the man kept displaying a business card. "I didn't know Mr. Donovan had a lawyer," she said. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "There's a reason for that." He hadn't had a family of his own for many years, but he wanted to make sure his wishes were carried out without giving any more details. The attorney turned and knocked softly on the door before entering. and Anna watched him vanish into the room with a strange sense of unease. She wondered why Mr. Donovan had felt the need to call a lawyer, and the thought lingered with her as she went about her rounds, but she didn't let it consume her for too long. Later in her shift, Anna went back to room 95. Although she wanted to know more about Mr. Donovan's life and didn't want to intrude on his privacy, she decided against it and continued to care for him as she always did, with gentleness and quiet understanding. However, in the days that followed, something felt different. Mr. Donovan was sitting quietly as usual, his eyes fixed on the window. The elderly man started to exhibit subtle changes, such as becoming noticeably weaker, having trembling hands that shook when they rested on the blanket, and having slower, more labored breathing. Despite his physical decline, Anna could see that his eyes were always bright when she entered the room, and she was determined to make his days brighter even though she knew his time was running out. Anna started spending more time with him after her shift ended. She often stayed, pulling up a chair by his bedside to sit quietly and talk with him about her life and childhood, ensuring he never felt alone. Though he rarely spoke, his nods and soft expressions said everything she needed to know. He wasn't just her patient anymore, he had become someone she genuinely cared for. In those quiet moments, she felt a deep sense of purpose, determined to make his last days as peaceful as possible. As her shift ended that night, she carried with her a small portable radio, something she had borrowed from the nurse's lounge. With a gentle click, soft classical music filled the quiet room. The elderly man lay in his bed, his frail body barely moving, but his eyes opened slightly at the sound. Anna smiled, pulling up a chair beside him. She adjusted his blanket carefully, ensuring he was comfortable, and then began speaking softly about the little things, the weather outside, the flowers blooming in the courtyard, and how peaceful the ward seemed that evening. She knew he couldn't respond much, but she also knew he was listening. His tired eyes softened, and for a moment there was a trace of calm on his face. Before leaving on his bedside table, Anna laid a fresh lily next to the picture of the woman he always glanced at. She stopped by the doorway and gave him one last look. The room was quieter than usual, almost serene. She left with a bittersweet feeling, hoping that her small gestures had given him some measure of comfort. The following morning, when Anna entered the hospital, an odd silence appeared to descend across the ward. She couldn't quite identify it, but something seemed strange. When she passed the nurse's station, a coworker kissed her arm and her countenance was solemn. Mr. D. Donovan passed away last night. The words hit her like a wave. For a moment she couldn't move her mind, reeling as her heart ached. She had known his time was short, but the finality of those words felt heavier than she had expected. She nodded silently, not trusting herself to speak, and made her way to room 95. When she stepped inside, the emptiness of the room struck her. The bed was neatly made, the medical equipment removed, and the faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air. The room, once filled with quiet but poignant moments, now felt stark and hollow. Her gaze landed on the bedside table where the photograph of the woman still sat, now accompanied by the lily she had placed there the night before. Anna's knees weakened and she sat down in the chair she had often occupied during her visits. Her fingers brushed the edges of the photograph, and for a moment tears welled up in her eyes. She thought about the man who had sat in this bed alone, but dignified, carrying a lifetime of memories in his silence. Though grief washed over her, there was also a sense of comfort. She realized that in his final days he hadn't been completely alone. She had been there, sharing moments of warmth and humanity, even when words weren't exchanged. The thought brought a bittersweet smile to her face, and as she stood to leave, she whispered softly, "Rest well, Mr. Donovan." Later that same day, as Anna lingered near the ward, unable to fully shake the heaviness in her heart, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was the lawyer who had visited Mr. Donovan just a few days ago. His expression was kind but solemn, and in his hand he held a small envelope. "Nurse Anna," he said, stopping before her, "Mr. Donovan asked me to deliver this to you after his passing. It was very important to him." Anne's breath hitched as she took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "He wrote this for me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The lawyer nodded. "Yes, he also wanted you to know something about him, something he rarely shared. Mr. Donovan wasn't always alone. He was once a successful businessman, a self-made businessman who built a thriving company, but after losing his wife and having no children, he stepped away from it all, choosing a quiet, solitary life. You brought light back into his final days, and he wanted to honor you for that." Anna blinked, momentarily stunned. She had always wondered about the quiet sadness that lingered in his eyes, but she had never pressed him to share more. Tears welled up as she looked down at the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling carefully. She opened it, revealing a letter written in shaky but deliberate handwriting. As she began to read, "Dear Anna, your kindness gave me peace in my final days. I have no family, so I've chosen to leave what I have to you. You once shared your dream of becoming a doctor, and I hope this helps you achieve it. Please accept it as my way of thanking you for your compassion and for making me feel seen and valued. May it bring you the happiness you deserve and help you fulfill your dreams, Miss Donovan." If this story resonated with you, please remember to like the video and share it with someone who believes in the power of compassion. If you'd like to hear more inspirational stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel and join us on this journey of kindness and humanity. Together, let's spread the message that even the smallest acts of care can change lives, sometimes in ways we least expect. Anna held the letter close as a deep sense of gratitude washed over her.